Hey everybody, KC here. So today, as promised, a special extended conversation with former New Jersey Governor Christie, who is the keynote speaker at this year's National Grocers Association convention in Las Vegas, February 27th in Las Vegas. And listen, I really enjoyed my conversation with Governor Christie. We talked about a lot of really interesting issues, top of mind issues for the industry. We talked about supply chain. We talked about inflation. We talked about staffing issues. We talked a little bit about antitrust. We talked about branding. Okay. And we even got into who's his favorite Democrat and who's the Republican that he thinks of as best representing the standards and the character and the values of the Republican Party. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with Governor Christie. Governor Christie, welcome to Morning Newsbeat. Thanks for doing this.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I want to start by asking you a branding question, since branding is something that's top of mind for everybody who's going to be in the audience at the National Grocers Association. You'll be doing the keynote there on February 27th. And I want to ask the question in terms of a place I think you probably know, which is Bay Head, New Jersey. Place I used to go to all the time when I was a kid. I live in Connecticut. There's a place in Bay Head called Muller's Bakery.
Yep.
I will drive 2 hours from Connecticut to go to Muller's Bakery to get the crumb cake. And there's always a line because they've managed to differentiate themselves. So the first question I want to ask you is, as somebody who's been in government, politician, how do you think about branding? And are there lessons there that can be transferred to retailers who are looking to differentiate themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, if you're going to be a successful politician, you better be thinking about branding all the time. And my approach and the approach of my staff all the time was that, branding has to be consistent first.
Right.
That when you establish a brand, everything you do needs to be consistent with that brand, or else the public begins to question the second part that you need for effective branding, which is authenticity. If you try to be something that you're not, whether it's as a retailer, as a politician, or as a banker, it doesn't matter. The public will sniff it out. Sometimes it takes longer than others, but authenticity is incredibly important to branding. Be who you are and be genuine. And I think the third thing is to be unique. Now, it's got to be uniqueness that is consistent with your authenticity. But I think if you're unique, you're authentic, and consistent, those three things will lead to real success in terms of your branding efforts, and it certainly has led to success in mine.
Yeah. Well, and you end up with lines either whether it's at a bakery or at the polling places, right? That's what you want.
Right. That's what you're shooting for. Although I will tell you, having the crumb cake concession at Muller's would be quite the profitable enterprise.
Yes, absolutely. So let me ask you a couple of policy questions based on things I know the people in the audience are going to be thinking about. If there's three concerns that they're going to have sitting there, one is going to be inflation. Another one is going to be supply chain. And the third would probably be staffing issues, maybe technology as well. But in terms of policy, if you were in charge right now to dealing with inflation, supply chain, and staffing, what would you do? What kind of policy prescriptions would you have to solve some of the problems that the country is facing right now?
Well, first on inflation, stop spending. Stop spending money in the government. I mean, I think what this inflation was caused in large measure by the $1.9 trillion Rescue America plan, which was obviously misnamed by the Biden administration. And the fact is that when you start handing out that kind of money all over the place, you're going to overheat an economy that was already recovering from COVID. And so I think the first thing on inflation would be to stop spending. On supply chain, look, part of the problem here is that we don't manufacture things in America anymore. And that's becoming a bigger problem. And we saw that during COVID some of the things that we needed to combat the virus were not available here. So we need to go about incentivizing manufacturing in the United States as a long-term solution. In the short term, I think that the problem is that because of the acts of the Biden administration on overheating the economy, it's going to be very hard to deal with supply chain in the short term. And I think anybody who tells you that they can is just not telling you the truth. And I think third, if you're looking at staffing, again, this is a product of the Rescue America plan and the extension of unemployment benefits, the enhancement of unemployment benefits. Look, if you're going to pay somebody as much or more to sit home on their couch, then you're going to pay them to work in a grocery store, stocking shelves, working the register, working in the butcher area, working in the cold cuts area. They're going to stay home. Many of them are going to stay home, and so we're starting to pull back on those policies a bit, but it's going to take a while to get people back into the mode of it. And here's where the inflation kicks in a big way. They're not going to want to go to work when most of their pay is getting eaten up by what they have to pay at the gas station, what they have to pay at the supermarket. This is just not going to be something that they're going to want to do, and they'd rather stay home. So I think these three issues are all interconnected, especially the first and third. And I think that if I were in charge on the staffing side, it would be to stop providing incentive for people not to work and start providing incentive for them to get back to work.
To connect 1 and 2, how do you incentivize without spending? Isn't incentivizing spending?
No, well, look, I think you can do it through tax credits. And in the end, if you do tax credits appropriately, we did them in New Jersey frequently, you wind up creating more revenue for the government than you wind up spending, because you're getting people employed who wouldn't have been employed before. You're getting purchasing that's done in your state that would not have been being done before to support that manufacturing activity. So if you do the right type of tax incentives can be really helpful, because remember, they don't get the incentives unless they add the employees and they produce the product. And so you're going to be stemming the tide of the other problem that you were talking about.
Another big issue that the audience is going to be thinking about is antitrust and at the FTC. So where do you come down on sort of Lina Khan's prescription, which would seem to be to either break up or regulate the big technology? And is that a wise way to go forward? And then where do you draw the line? So small companies, because a lot of the small companies in the audience are companies that are short on resources to compete with the big companies and actually would benefit by being acquired or merging. And I think there's a lot of concern about the government stopping mergers that actually make sense.
Look, I think that what we're dealing with here now, more than anything else, is a radical left-wing agenda that wants to manage and micromanage at the government level the way business is conducted in America. Now, I have some real concerns about the way tech is acting, big tech in particular is acting. My concerns are much more in the area of freedom of expression. These are folks who have been immune from lawsuits based on what's on their social media sites, their websites, because they posited themselves as just bulletin boards. And they weren't exercising editorial control. But in fact, we now know that they have and continue to exercise editorial control. And while you may agree or disagree with the things, for instance, that Donald Trump tweets, you can't come to any other conclusion that Twitter is editing when they kick Donald Trump off the site, yet they keep the Ayatollah Khomeini on the site. So, I think that I have concerns, but I'm not sure that breaking them up is the way that we need to go here. And I'm not so sure that I want to trust Lina Khan and the government to decide how to best run one of the biggest parts of America's business world. And so, to me, I think these decisions should be made by people in business who have that expertise. And what the government should be looking for are those egregious examples of when there will be no choice left for consumers in a marketplace And if that's the case, then they have to look very carefully at that. But otherwise, they shouldn't be inserting their own opinions in the place of the men and women who run these businesses.
Isn't is in some ways is the old construct in terms of what competition means, is it still relevant today? I think of the fact that, like, say, Staples wanted to buy or wanted to merge with Office Depot and was prevented by, I can't remember, was the FTC or the Justice Department. And I didn't think that was a good decision because I felt like the only chance those two had to compete against Amazon was to merge. So do you think that there are mergers, though, that do make sense? And then conversely, mergers that don't make sense. I mean, if Walmart announced they wanted to acquire Target tomorrow, that would be very, I mean, that would, I think, have an enormous impact on competition.
Look, there's no question that there are nuances to all this, and you've got to be smart about the way you do it. And I think that, you know, the fact is, you're right that there are going to be some mergers where you look at it and say, what mergers always have to be considered in the context of what's the competitive field look like. And if the competitive field is being dominated by Amazon in the office supply and business area, well then, you know, bringing Staples and Office Depot together may be pro-competition, not anti-competition. Right. And this is why you've got to work with a scalpel in these instances and not a meat axe. And what I'm afraid is the Biden administration is about to operate with a meat axe on a lot of the economy. And then that's going to be very bad for the future of business in this country, and will take a while to recover from.
What about, let me ask you about a little bit about leadership. I mean, when you were governor of New Jersey, I mean, you had some headwinds. Not everybody in the legislature agreed with you. People in the audience, you know, sometimes they're managing in tough situations, adverse situations. Give me a management tenet or two that you would give them in terms of dealing with people and trying to get everybody to move in the same direction.
First, it's a lot harder to hate up close. I think the more you get to know your people and they get to know you, they look you in the eye and hear directly from your voice, not over some email or some Zoom video. It's just a lot harder to hate up close. And I think the only way to really effectively manage is to let people get to know who you are. And the way to do that is to get close to them, and let them see your heart. Let them see what you've invested in the business. Let them see what you care about in terms of your priorities as a leader. So I think the first tenet would be it's harder to hate up close. I think the second thing to always keep in mind is listening. And you need to provide your employees with as many forums as your time allows for you to listen to their concerns. People's frustration, in my experience, will be lessened if in fact they believe they've been heard. Not that they've been agreed with, but they've been legitimately heard. And I found a lot of problems I solved with the state legislature would just be sitting there and listening to this group of Democrats carp and moan and complain. It might not change my position an iota,
right?
But they felt like they got an audience, and they were taken seriously, and they were heard. The third thing I would say is a clear articulation of principles, which you remain consistent with. Your actions remain consistent with your words. And whatever those principles are for you, you know, hopefully they include honesty and integrity and hard work, and a number of other issues, but certainly honesty, integrity, and hard work. I think you can build a lot behind that. But you got to have a clear articulation of what our corporate principles are, not my personal ones, but what we want to provide, who we want to be as a corporate citizen. So I think those three are pretty good start to how you motivate folks and make your way through sometimes very choppy waters.
I suspect the audience at NGA, if they're like most audiences or almost any demographic in America, there's going to be some level of skepticism, maybe disillusionment with the current political, sort of just the tenor of things. Can you make me feel better, or make me feel better about the state of politics and governance in this country?
Sure. First of all, I do so by telling you that we have problems, but I also will say, and I'll say this when we get together, the people who tell us that our country's more divided now than it's ever been are foolish. And I'll give you a few examples. Let's start with the Civil War.
Okay.
600,000 Americans killed each other, and states seceded from the Union. I would say we're better shape now than we were then. And take 1968, Bobby Kennedy being assassinated, Martin Luther King being assassinated, many of our major cities burning to the ground by the hands of their own citizens, and students and some adults burning their draft cards and defecting to Canada in order to avoid fighting in a war that they didn't agree with. That was a very, very divided country, much more divided than we are today. I will tell you this. I look at the events of January 6th of 2021, and I'm one of the people who finds encouragement, not discouragement. That's not to say that I don't take January 6th seriously. I do. And I believe that what happened on January 6th was an horrible thing for our country, in our country's history, but one that we need to address. But I don't think it showed the weakness of our democracy. I believe it showed the resilience of it. Because despite that attack, by early that next morning, all of those members of Congress were back on the floor of the House and the Senate, and they were all voting to certify the election of Joe Biden as president. They had withstood an attempted coup, and they had said, no, we're going to do it this way, the way the voters directed with their votes back in November. If you can't look at that as an incredibly strong democracy, when people were chanting, hang Mike Pence, and invaded the building, I think it shows the strength and resilience of our democracy. Now, we have work to do, but name me a time in this country when we haven't had work to do. And I don't know of one. That's why in the front of the Constitution, they say, in order to form a more perfect union. They never wanted to assume that we were going to be a perfect union, but they wanted us to form a more perfect union. And that's what we're in the process of doing. Some days are a little bit rougher than others, but I'm an optimist about our country and its government in the future.
Let me ask you an off-the-wall question. Who's your favorite Democrat? And by that, I mean somebody who you look at and say, we disagree on almost everything, but they have the best interest of the country at heart. And I could probably, if I put in the position, I could work with them to move the country forward.
I don't even have to guess because I have worked with them. Now Ambassador, formerly Mayor Rahm Emanuel. Rahm and I worked.
I'm sorry. I'm laughing because my wife and I watch Stephanopoulos every Sunday. And the last thing my wife said when she left is, can you ask him if he really likes Rahm Emanuel?
I do.
I said, I don't think I can, but there you gave it to me.
Yeah, look, Rahm and I have extraordinarily different opinions on the role of government and on different things that have occurred over the last number of years, starting with the election of Donald Trump all the way through the election of Joe Biden. But I could tell you that Rahm is somebody who is earnest and hardworking and straight. He'll give it to you straight. And so I enjoyed my years working with Rahm, and while I have some good partners on ABC now, I miss Rahm over in Tokyo. It was great to work with him for all those years.
Other than yourself, who's your favorite Republican? Somebody who you look at and say, Democrats should look at that person as being this. I use the word standard bearer, but with small letters. Somebody who you say that's the kind of Republican people should think about. They represent the values of the Republican Party in a way that the entire country should see them. Other than yourself.
Yep, I'd say James Baker.
Okay.
Here's a guy who's now in his early 90s, who served a number of different presidents, who has always, in my view, put the best interest of the country first. He's a conservative Republican, but one who also understands that compromise is not only advisable but necessary in a well-functioning democracy. And I don't think anyone would accuse Jim Baker of ever having been soft, but he also was somebody who understood how to strike a deal. We need more Jim Bakers in our party and in our country right now.
I have two final questions. The first one is a question that I've always thought that every presidential candidate should be asked. And since you've been a presidential candidate and may soon be a presidential candidate again, this is my shot. If you were in office right now and you had to make a decision that you thought was the absolute right decision for the country, but it would also piss off your base, what would it be?
Oh, it would have to be to make the decision that's in the best interest of the country. And I think that I displayed that when I was governor in the aftermath of Hurricane Sandy. I welcomed President Obama to New Jersey. It was 6 days before a presidential election, where I had been the keynote speaker for his opponent. And it's his single largest fundraiser, Mitt Romney, who's a good man. But my job as governor was to put the interests of my people first, the people who elected me and who I served. And I think you always have to make that decision. I knew that it was going to be an unpopular one amongst many Republicans, but I also knew that my first job was to make sure that I got the people in my state the assistance they needed to recover from the second worst natural disaster in the country's history. So that's my answer, and that's my proof point as to the fact that I'm not just talking about this, I've actually walked this walk.
Do you think that's I lied. I have one more that I want to ask first. Do you think that is a problem with modern politics, though, that too often elected officials on both sides of the aisle are unwilling to take off their bases?
I don't know if it's a new phenomenon, quite frankly. I think that part of what contributes to this is, the continued separation of our congressional districts and the idea that, they're a red district or a blue district, and then all you have to worry about is the primary, and we have to worry about the general. I think that's one of the products of this. What you're talking about is one of the products of that. So I don't know that it's much worse now than before, but certainly you see fewer profiles in courage.
Yeah. Okay, last question. You've been incredibly generous with your time. So I know that you're a minority owner on the Mets. We got Scherzer.
Yes.
And we got a lockout. Give me some hope, man.
Oh, look, I think the hope comes from listening to the commissioner this week, who said that it would be disastrous for the sport to miss any regular season games. I've known Rob Manfred for a long time. I don't think he would say that if he was not intent on making sure that we didn't miss any games, because he'll have that fed back to him over and over and over again if we do. And so I think that billionaires and multimillionaires should be able to figure out how to divide billions of dollars a year in a way that makes most of them fairly wealthy. And I have confidence that on March 31st, either Jacob deGrom or Max Scherzer are going to be throwing the first pitch of the season for the Mets.
I would assume that also, I would think that one of the things we're likely to see also is there will probably be a designated hitter. I'm sure that deGrom is not going to be hitting anymore.
No, I think that the commissioner announced that yesterday.
Oh, did he? I missed that. Okay.
They have already agreed on a universal DH. And so Jacob deGrom, I think appropriately, will be the last Met pitcher ever to hit a home run. And even more appropriately, he will have done so in a 2-1 loss, which for those of us who are Mets fans, we know that is absolutely perfect.
Absolutely. Well, listen, thank you again so much for your time today. I look forward to being both in the audience and maybe getting a chance to meet you out at NGA. For the audience, you're going to be you're the keynote speaker at the end of the day on Sunday, February 27th. And how great is it going to be for people to be able to actually get together in the same room? And, I think everybody kind of feels it's about time.
We're looking forward to it, and I'm looking forward to being in Las Vegas with all of you and having a really great discussion about the issues you brought up and a bunch of others that I'm sure will be brought up as well.
Sounds great. Take care. Thanks very much.
Thank you.